Now, one bloke who seems to be in a little bit of trouble at the moment is Jamie Oliver, of course, the celebrity chef. He's in Australia at the moment, spruiking his newest cookbook, but it's not the cookbook that's got him in trouble. It is a kids' book. Yes, of course, it seems to be the thing now that when someone goes, oh, you know, what can I do to make some easy money? I'll go and write a kids' book. Well, that's exactly what Jamie Oliver has done. And in the course of writing this book, he's seemingly tried to, appeal to the woke, appeal to the left by saying, oh, well, we'd better have a subplot in this book that involves an Indigenous kid in Australia. Let's tick all the boxes. Now, I haven't read the whole thing. I don't know whether he's done the same with Indians in the US or whatever, but he thought, we'll tick a few boxes here. We'll chuck an Indigenous character in this book. Well, guess who's taken issue with the Indigenous character being in the book? Indigenous people. I'm not joking. The National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Education Corporation has taken it up with Mr. Oliver that he's actually, through the course of writing this book, included stereotypes and tropes that are damaging to Indigenous people. Now, I'll tell you what was in the book. This is how The Guardian describes this particular section of his book. It says, Billy and the Epic Escape, that is the book, a humorous fantasy adventure novel, is set in England but involves a subplot where a wicked woman with supernatural powers teleports herself to Alice Springs to steal a child from a fictitiously named community called Borrolama. She wants an Australian Indigenous child to join her press gang of kidnapped children who work her land because, quote, First Nations children seem to be more connected with nature. You can see where this is going. The adults responsible for Ruby, a young girl who lives in foster care and likes to eat desert bush food, are distracted by the woman's promise of funding for their community projects. My God, that sounds slightly familiar, doesn't it, Mr. Albanese voice? Once abducted, Ruby tells the English children who rescue and repatriate her that she can read people's minds and communicate with animals and plants because, quote, that's the Indigenous way. Well, that's news to me. She also tells them she is from Mbantua, which is the Indigenous word for Alice Springs, yet uses words from the Gamilari people of New South Wales and Queensland when explaining her life in Australia. In other words, Jamie Oliver has thought, well, we better chuck an Indigenous character in here, but we'll do no work to make sure that we actually get it right. He says, I am devastated to hear I have caused offence and wholly apologise for doing so. I am listening and reflecting and working closely with my publisher on next steps. I think it rather proves the point, doesn't it, that when you try to appease the left, it doesn't usually work. They come and get you anyway. I mean, how good is... Oh, well, we'll have an Indigenous character in here. How good am I? He can't even get the languages right. He's got them all over the place. Weird stuff about Indigenous kids being able to read minds. And where the hell does this stuff come from?
Can I just say, after listening to you read that portion, I reckon you'd be good for the audio book. You could get a contract.
Oh, yeah.
I reckon kids could just fall asleep at night to the dulcet tones of Caleb Bond. It's fiction, for goodness sake. It's not real, so who cares if it's not factual? It's fiction. That's the point. One of the reasons why the woke are so on the nose, and part of the reason Trump won, is people are sick of how nasty they are. I mean, they're complaining that this book is damaging, disrespectful, and it's contributing to the, quote, erasure of First Nations people's experiences. It's a fictional science fiction children's book, for goodness sake. I don't think they're upset that Jamie Oliver wrote it. I think they're upset that they didn't get paid to be consulted on the writing of the book. They say that when Aboriginal characters are included in books, even fictional books, that there must be respect. There must be, and here's the clue, consultation with cultural experts, and I dare say they won't do that without a fee, and there must be permission. So now you have to have permission to include an Indigenous character in a work of fiction. Here's what will happen. Fictional writers will decide, you know what, we won't include any Indigenous characters because it's just too much of a risk. And then Indigenous activists will complain that they're not being represented in fiction.
Exactly, which is why it was so ironic that NatSec used the word erasure. This is indicative of the erasure of Indigenous Australians. You've just guaranteed the erasure because you've just announced on the world stage, Jamie Oliver, there isn't a more famous chef in the world, I don't think, and you've just told everyone, if you try this on, we'll come after you. We'll never be happy with what you do. We'll never never be happy with the representation. And Penguin Random Books, the publisher, has also come out and said, we are so sorry. We normally do a authenticity reading, which would have picked up on this kind of thing. It's completely our bad. We are so sorry. Of course, Jamie Oliver and the publisher have not committed to taking the book off the shelves, which is what NatSec is demanding. But here's the thing. Had Penguin actually done that authenticity reading, it would have depended on which Indigenous group you asked for their opinion as to whether they liked it or not. Because as we know, by virtue of having the same ethnicity doesn't mean everyone agrees. We haven't got Indigenous consensus on a certain mine that is currently on hold here in Australia. So the very idea that you have to ask for permission, get the blessing of Indigenous Australians as a whole, it's a complete furphy. You can't. For every group that would have said, read the book, love it, bombs away, go for it, you'd find another Indigenous group who was like, actually, this is really insensitive, it's trivialising, it's stereotyping, we don't like it at all. So what have you achieved in the end, except for paying a lot of Indigenous groups for their opinions, and then you've got to decide which one to go with?